The views expressed by the hosts of the In Full Bloom Book Club series are not necessarily those held by In Full Bloom Media. Our hosts do not claim to be experts on the topics we discuss, but instead will express opinions derived from their own experiences.
The In Full Bloom Book Club is committed to exploring real issues that affect humanity. These conversations may be challenging and heavy, but we believe them to be necessary and hope they will be empathy cultivating and transformative for the host and for all of you. Please remember that these discussions are made for an adult audience, so view at your discretion.
All right, ladies. So welcome back to another episode with In Full Bloom Book Club. Here we utilize the transformative power of storytelling to explore perspectives, cultivate empathy, and inspire positive change. So we are currently reading the book Scorpionfish by Natalie Bakopoulos. During today's episode, we will be discussing chapters 1 through 6. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. We kind of talked a little bit earlier about our first impressions, but just for our audience sake, how are we feeling about these 6 chapters we read, ladies?
So I'll go ahead and start because I trashed the book so much.
You didn't trash it.
It was on the edge of trashing. It was right on that nice edge of being polite.
We edited that part out.
Oh, good.
No, I'm joking.
So I actually ended up enjoying this one pretty well. I definitely struggled in the first few chapters, and then by the 6th I didn't really want to stop reading. I wanted to keep going, and I had to take a pause and not continue through. I really enjoyed that Athens was mentioned so often, and it felt like it was just another character that was involved in the story, and it was just as complicated as all the other characters that we're seeing. I did struggle with the captain a little bit, and that went back and forth for me, but I think what we're just seeing is that it's all very complicated characters and they're not one-dimensional. I will say the only thing that I consistently have struggled with is that their relationship for me felt very quick. It was very oh, we're sitting next to each other and now I'm going to tell you so much about my life story, and I'm like, wait, where is that coming from? You've talked to him half of a time. It wasn't even a real time. So I'm struggling with that, but I'm gonna give the author the benefit of the doubt that it's gonna all come back into play and work out well. So yeah. I at least there's more benefit of the doubt in this episode than there was in the intro episode.
That's a start.
It's progress.
Yeah, Bridget, I'll note on a few things, a few things you were talking about. I agree the relationship developed very quickly. I'm really interested in kind of them uncovering why the relationship developed that way, or kind of understanding based on where they are in their lives, why it developed so quickly. I thought that having it in the context of Greece, of everything that was going on at the time. Yeah, I'm not familiar with kind of the political atmosphere of Greece. And they were talking a lot about the refugees and kind of even some tension between ethnic groups. And that was really interesting to hear and to kind of, dive into the realities of another place in the world with us, being Americans. And I appreciate the captain a lot so far. I'm very interested in the captain, and I tend to be interested in exploring characters or discovering more about characters who have desires outside of the norm. He seems to have a certain level of dissatisfaction with the familial dynamic or with family life, and I think that's really interesting. That level of not being satisfied is something I really resonate with. So I think it's really interesting to explore that. And I just think the characters are interesting. There seems to be a lot to uncover there. So I'm excited.
I actually feel quite obsessed with Natalie. I don't know, something about her just sparks this, I don't know, this real interest in me. I'm just you're an interesting person. Just the way she speaks in the novel, her life, she's very open, but also it feels like maybe there's a part that's a huge mystery. I don't know. I feel like I keep feeling like there's hints to something's happening, like something's brewing. And as we mentioned earlier, the story seems to be told from like everything's already happened, so they're just recalling these events. So, and then also I'm picking up on how they're talking about certain things. It just feels like they're trying to slowly like reveal a little bit at a time to us. So I'm really interested in where this book is taking us. All right, ladies. So this first half of our questions is called Straight Out the Text. So it's a text analysis type questions. And the first question, in chapter 3, Mira goes to the beach with Natalie, waking up disoriented from a nap at the beach. Mira hears someone, either her mother or in her dream. It's either her mother in her dream or Natalie, who was there in the present, say it's written on the body. What do you believe is being communicated here?
So I might be taking my own bias with this one. It's kind of what you get from books. So, but I felt like it was saying like, your story is written on your body. Like how and you can take this in multiple ways of like scars and, you know, the physical representations of what your life has given you or what your life has taken from you and what involves all of that. Or you can take it the other way of like how you hold yourself and how you present yourself to the world and how you present yourself to you personally as well, that your story is written on your body. And it might be a good story, it might be a painful story, but either way, those stories are all there. And yeah, that was the immediate, you know, feeling that I got from it, was especially because her relationship with her mother is so complicated and her relationship is so, it's inflected with all of these different things that went in with her relationship with her mother, the alcohol abuse, but also that she obviously sees her mother as this very beautiful woman, this very like vibrant woman at different times. So I think it went back and forth for me on that, where it was like, okay, well, I could see her mother saying this to her, is it's written on your body, your story's written on your body.
Yeah, I had a difficult time interpreting this particular quote. It maybe this is kind of a conversation about like how stress wears on your body. I don't know.
I mean, going with your thread, it could definitely be a like look at how like the societal pressures are almost written on your body, because she's talking about desire and sex, and Mira's talked a couple times about like how Eris had wanted this family and had wanted all these things that she didn't feel she could give him. And if you're looking at like, you know, it's written on your body, well, motherhood is written on your body, marriage is written on your body, you wear the wedding ring or you wear some symbol of that marriage all the time. So you can almost look at it that way too, that like these things that society is asking of her is not written on her body, or it's, you know, the fact that it's lacking is written on her body.
I agree with you, Tia. I honestly been sitting on it. I can't really pinpoint exactly what I think that meant. I'm breaking down what she said, and to me, it's written on the body is kind of synonymous with the saying the writings on the wall, something that's obvious, that's all in your face. And I'm trying to figure out something in the story that's kind of along the lines of that, something that's in the face that's obvious to see, but sometimes we don't want to see. So that's where I'm at right now. So, but I don't know.
Ooh, okay, Asia. I loved that. And I think maybe subconsciously I was making that connection as well. Maybe it's kind of a suggestion that like, hey, the trauma, the stress of it all is obvious, even though you're not necessarily expressing it outwardly, crying uncontrollably or whatever, it's still obvious.
Our second question for Straight Out the Text. When describing her relationship with her parents to the captain, Mary explained, and this is a quote, "Those nights when she stopped the bizarre mix of conversation and terror-stricken cries she'd have with herself, I released from my duties, but I never went back to my bedroom. I'd fall asleep in the high-ceilinged living room, watching TV, Saturday Night Live, or a movie, or those ridiculous nighttime soaps that I stupidly loved. In the large room, I felt safe on the couch, but terrified to move, to pass the den door, afraid my mother would stir from her drunkenness and say something unintelligible or mean. So I'd remain on the couch until my father returned from his nightclub and carried me up to my room. The smell of tobacco in his shirt pocket had signaled that I was off duty and could collapse into childhood again. What emotional or sensory experience does this produce for you? Feel free to share just your present experience as well as discuss memories, thoughts, or insights that come to mind.
For me, I think that definitely gives me a feeling of anxiety and hesitation, apprehensiveness. It reminds me of my experience of just kind of being a cautious child and a cautious person in general. I'm a pretty cautious adult, and kind of being also fairly perceptive, or always connected to the energy in the room. I think that I, can remember a lot of moments growing up where you're just aware of, you're aware of what other people are thinking, you're aware of what other people are feeling, and you're trying to kind of balance or make sense of the energies. And I tend to always try to take the role of like an energy shifter. And so, I feel like it's my duty, and how arrogant of me to believe that I'm gonna make those kind of changes. But I always find myself burdened by this responsibility of adjusting people's energies. And I felt that sense of anxiety of, I have to make sure everything's all right for everyone.
Definitely have a lot of sadness for Mira in this.
Yeah.
And it struck me that her father isn't really mentioned often as her mother's alcoholism is in this first 6 chapters. Mm-hmm. But in this, we're seeing that maybe he owned this nightclub. That's the best I could come up with. But otherwise, he's out until late hours of the night. And she, a child, is at home handling her alcoholic mother and the alcoholic fits she has. And obviously, these are not isolated. Obviously, these are not just slurring her speech and falling asleep. These are very, I don't want to say violent, but aggressive almost. They're aggressive and they're dramatics. And she, as a child, is being left to deal with this by herself. And then her father comes in and he ends up being the saving grace of the situation. He releases her from the freeze of her panic. It shows the burden we put on moms too, to a degree, where she's not talking about the fact that her father left her to do this night after night after night, knowing what his young daughter was having to deal with. He knew how much his wife was drinking. He knew how much it was going on behind the scenes, so to speak. But he still allowed his young daughter to take on this responsibility. And it's kind of that weird thing within the family dynamic where we put so much more pressure and so much more fault on the mothers than we do on the fathers. And I'm guilty of this too. When I think of the things I have to get through, so to speak, it's issues I have with my mom. It's not issues I have with my dad. And I have plenty of issues with my dad. He is not a perfect person by any means, but when we think back on those things, we always think about how our moms shaped us. And, even Freud, that was his whole thing, was how your mom shaped you. So it's interesting to see it in such a short paragraph demonstrated so perfectly, that the fault is not on her dad. The fault is purely on her mom, who is dealing with this awful sickness and this awful addiction. And Mira is just stuck in the middle of 2 adults who should have done better for her.
I do agree with both of you. I definitely feel that heavy burden and that involuntary responsibility kind of placed on Mira at that time, of that age. As kids, I feel like or most kids at least, I know for me, I did this. I just wanted to people please a lot. I wanted balance. I wanted harmony in home. So I did that at all costs, and that typically was at your own cost. Your own kind of enjoyment of life. So, and we can tell this is just something that's kind of going less heavy on her even into her adult years. She's, I guess we kind of figure she's around her 40s at this point. And, that being that vivid imagery that she has of that moment, that's definitely something that's weighing her. And I imagine it's something that has influenced a lot of decisions in her life of where she is now. So, and yeah, I agree, Bridget. I don't think I thought about it that deep, but we don't hear much about her father and his role in all of this. So that's really interesting as well. So yeah.
I was reading something once, or maybe I was listening to something, and the speaker was kind of talking about the fact that we are so connected to our parents' opinions of us, in part because from the very beginning, we require them to be willing to do things for us, you know, feed us, nurture us, clothe us. We're so dependent on them. And so them, you know, appreciating us, them, you know, supporting our decisions, them liking us, them being in a good, you know, being in good standing with our parents is attached to our survival as kids. I think that's why we have this elevated sense of fear when we begin to, you know, sense disapproval.
But I did just want to point out that those are all trauma responses, that these are all directly related to parents not, I don't want to say not providing for us in the proper ways, but to some degree, it's the emotional health, it's the stability, it's all of those things that, like you're saying, Tia, we desperately depend on our parents for, you know, pretty much the first 18 years of our lives before we're off on our own, but especially those first 4 years. And the trauma response of responding to everybody's emotions constantly is absolutely deeply ingrained in children who have not, and I'm saying this of myself, I'm not putting this on your guys' experience by any means, but it is definitely deeply ingrained in the experience of children who do not feel like all of their needs were met when they were children. And it's like in those first formative years.
And so you're in this desperate place of trying to get those needs met.
Yeah. You have to, you know, you have to fight for it to some degree. And a lot of kids learn how to fight for it by becoming empaths and learning how to read the energy of the room so that they can fix the energy in the room. Not to drop bombs on you, but I've been through a lot of therapy.
Next, we're moving into our next segment. And how does that make you feel? And that's a segment where we have questions developed for the purpose of some personal reflection. So I'm excited to get into it. Our first question. In the first chapter, there is a quote that reads, "I move through my apartment as though I could walk through walls, my past, present, and future self, all negotiating the same space, bumping shoulders, tripping over feet." To me, this illustrated the discomfort, or at least the adjusting required when one returns to spaces, either physically or figuratively, that they've been in at a previous point in their lives. As young adults, we are all likely at different places in navigating this bridge from our former adolescent self to understanding ourselves and being understood as adults. My question for you all is, what has that negotiation looked like for you? What challenges have you encountered during this transition, and how have you all reconciled these identities?
Naturally, I went to two different like places, so to speak, with this. The first one is my childhood home. And by that, I really just mean the house that my parents bought after I went to high school. So I only lived there for 3 years or so, but it's the one that I go back to now, you know. And I definitely feel that, where like I kind of bounce between like how I was when I was in high school and how I am now when I'm there. I shift back and forth, and I even can feel it in like the way I walk, because I developed a walk that's very much for apartments sometimes, where like I walk on the balls of my feet so that I'm not making too much noise. Yeah. And like, but at home, I don't have to do that. So I bounce back and forth between like those two walks even. And it's a very like physical manifestation of the pull that I feel when I'm home between acting like a 12-year-old and acting like a 26-year-old who's got her shit together now. And I'm like, it's a bit different, but you know, let's try this one where I'm like, Mom, braid my hair, but also I'm going to take the car and don't ask me where I'm going. Like, you know, both going on. The other one was going back to my married house. So I don't know if this has been mentioned on tape, but I'm divorced. I was in a relationship with a sailor in the Navy and blah, 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 but I am divorced now. And going back, so long story short, I moved out in the summer, and then I went back to get the rest of my stuff in the late fall. And that relationship, when it ended, was like a waking up for me. I had felt very dormant for a very long time. It was not a healthy relationship, and it was one that made me feel very confined in who I was as a person and really kind of suffocated me. And so when I was out of it, it was like I woke up again, and I wasn't in a healthy place. It was not, I wasn't coping the way that I always should have been, but I was doing my best kind of thing. But it was still like, oh, right, this is who I used to be, and this isn't who I am anymore, but this is who I'm like trying to figure out I am again. And so when I went back, for one, it wasn't my house anymore. Most of the furniture had been moved or taken. Most of the backyard was destroyed. The cat was gone because he had gotten given away. And it was a really painful experience, but it was that transition too, where I didn't feel proper in that house anymore, where when I walked in, I felt that like that grip of the suffocation, and I was able to like breathe it out and be like, no, that's not supposed to be here. That's not who this is anymore. And it was such a weird experience because it did feel like that. It felt like bumping into myself and being like, what is this? And who are you? And what are you doing in this house? You know, and it was such a weird experience, but it's one that I felt so connected to when she explained this, because it was like, it was surreal to be in a house where you were such a different person, and now to be walking through those same spaces and thinking of those memories, but realizing that it's not connected to you anymore in the way that it was.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Bridget. I'm right there with you. I've had a lot of times in conversation with people where I can feel myself, I'm not, regressing seems to have maybe a negative connotation, but regressing as far as like age-wise, into this persona that I held, you know, for so long, and that I felt the need to hold on to for the comfortability of other people, but also for myself, so that I didn't have to deal with the awkwardness of people recognizing who I am as an adult woman. And I remember even one time me talking to my therapist about an occasion, or a few occasions, where I would talk to someone who I'm close with and who I love very much, and would feel kind of crappy afterwards. And it wasn't because of, you know, anything that they said, but I realized that I was doing this thing that I've always done, where I'm trying to make people proud of me. Like I'm trying to give them reasons to, like, you know, I'm crafting exactly what I say to things that I know they'll appreciate, and they'll be like, oh, that was really wise. That was really smart. That was really compassionate, Tia. And I could feel myself, you know, crawling outside of my authenticity. And authenticity has been something that's been like a buzzword for me for a few years now, because it's so important to me. I'm trying to walk in my truth, live in my truth. I think that's how I can be of the best service to people. I think, you know, that's how I'm meant to live my life. And, you know, that's also honoring to just who I am. And so it can be so uncomfortable being around people who have, you know, especially like family members, who have known you for so long. So you would think you have this comfort level, but, you know, when you're meeting a new person, they're meeting you at the place that you are now. But when you have family members, you have to, you know, come to terms, and y'all are both grappling with who you were 10 years ago, who you were 15 years ago. And so it's trying to make sense of all of that and trying to reconcile all those pieces. It can feel really awkward, and it can be, for me, it's you're pulled between either I, you know, relinquish my authenticity and resort back to these old ways, right? Or I stand in my truth and have to bear the discomfort of that, you know what I mean? Which I really do think is a worthwhile thing when you summon the courage to do that, but that can be really hard. So now, Mira described, or I guess Natalie described, Mira, you know, bumping into herself. Oh, that was such a beautiful representation of how it feels, like tripping over yourself, like having that, like not having enough space to do both. And so you're just trying to figure out, like, how do I, as an authentic individual, fit into this space comfortably? And I think kind of the answer is it's going to be a little uncomfortable for a while. I don't think there's a way to really fit into it comfortably at first, you know?
I agree with both of you. I experienced that. I haven't had like a home I could go back to kind of experience it. It's more of being in the presence of family members, especially the side of my family where I don't see them as often. So they didn't get to see the development of, you know, who I've started to become. It's more, I see you every few years. And so that feels very uncomfortable it almost feels quite abrasive to just be like, oh, this is me now, you know, and kind of ruin their idea of who I was. It almost feels like I'm hurting their feelings in a way, or I'm like disappointing them. And I struggle with that a lot. I don't want to disappoint anyone, but at the same time, I'm disappointing myself because I'm not being me. And Tia, I 100% agree with you. It feels like there's just not enough room for me and sometimes in those spaces. And I just need to just stand in line with that version that they remember. And that feels so icky to me. Because again, it feels like I did myself a disservice because I fought so hard to move away from that, especially if it was like a place where I was already kind of masking myself. So me fighting that battle to get to where I am now, but then having to put it all back on me just to please everyone else, it really just hurts, honestly.
All right, y'all. So our final segment is in the grand scheme of things where we do societal reflection questions. Our question is, in chapter 3, when introducing her relationship with Nefele, Mira reveals her fascination with the group of women she'd read about in an anthropology study. After reading this excerpt, I'd like us all to reflect and respond to her thoughts and perception on this group of women and their experiences. The excerpt reads, when I was a graduate student in ethnographic studies, I read an anthropologist study on women in same-sex relationships in an unnamed Greek town. Many of them were married to men, had children, and did not refer to themselves as lesbian or queer. It might sound like they are victims of a conservative society, certainly true, but there was a wonderful progressive fluidity to it as a result. You can defy the system if you refuse to let it define you. It struck a chord with me, the freedom found between the lines and the way the women had navigated conflicting identities, broke barriers. I found myself deeply fascinated by these women, their nonchalance, their structured freedom. I am not making the hetero mistake of thinking that lesbian relationships are any easier than those between anyone else. It was this particular group, unwilling to declare one identity, that fascinated me. Was it oppression or freedom?
It's definitely a really interesting like piece to it. I wish there was like a little footnote that give us like a little resource to go and read more about it, because I would have loved to. But it is that question, right? Like people always, as we get more and more comfortable with the different labels we put on ourselves and put on other people so that we understand people and so that we're able to, like, you know, break down the ignorance and start to understand everybody, there is that question within so many different groups of how often is that label helpful and how often is that label hurtful. I did just think it was so interesting these women were able to meet their societal standards. You know, they were married to men, most likely they had children because that was what was expected of you at the time. And marriages weren't, you know, for love. They weren't for anything other than the societal gain of it or the familial gain of it. So, you know, women being married into families so their families become more wealthy, or the societal status of it, or what have you. So it's interesting that they got to have this like piece of themselves that they got to take outside of those societal pressures. And then it sounds like it was almost accepted that it was this consistent thing that was going on, that I wish there was more information, because is it behind the men's back? Is it, you know, this thing that's happening in the shadows that nobody's talking about? Or is it this thing that's like, you know, more or less accepted as long as it doesn't affect the societal standards?
I had some concern about this question because I'm always, again, trying to be mindful of like what, you know, how the benefits outweigh the harm of having certain conversations. What intrigued me about this was just the idea of how we can view the differing ways that we can view human beings. I think we're in a time where we are coming from a very compassionate place, wanting to champion the underdog, right? But I think there are times when it gets us to a place where we are so consumed in a narrative of something that we're not giving room for other narratives. And I'm not suggesting that this is the only place in time that we're doing that, or even that this is, the point in time in which we're doing it the most. So what I thought was interesting about this is that Mira, the way she viewed these women was in such a, reverent way, right? And so it doesn't feel offensive, right? The way she's talking about this. But again, there was something kind of controversial to me about what she was suggesting, because it felt like her saying, yeah, like these women had it good. And that was my concern. That this felt like she's admiring this product of their oppression. They've had to, learn how to define themselves. They've had to learn this level of comfort because society, didn't embrace them. And so I was concerned about having this conversation because of that. I've spoken, for example, when I'm in a room of Black people, right? And we're having conversation about race and ethnicity. It's not always the narrative that you hear on the news. And, obviously, Black people are people. And so we come to a variety of different conclusions about a lot of things, including race, including, racial equality, including the state of Black America. And so what I thought was interesting about this is just, bringing to light the idea that people can see so differently the state of a community, and it not always be coming with ill intent.
Really one of the more interesting parts of the story to me, I guess. And I think because I know about different parts in time where something similar to this, so to speak, kind of happened, but they talked about the collective grieving at the end of the relationships. It was like one of the last lines of that quote where it said that what was most interesting to me was there was a collective grieving as a relationship ended. And that kind of makes it sound like these relationships are out to some degree. People are aware that they are happening. Because if they weren't, then there wouldn't be this like societal grief or the collective grief to the end of a relationship like that. But it's yeah, right.
I interpreted that as like between the two people, like both of them feeling a level of grief.
To me, that's normal. There's always a collective grief between two people that are like breaking up in a relationship. So I guess that's why I took it towards like a small community, and whether it was just, the community of queer people in this society, or whether it was the community as a whole. But it seems to be that there's some kind of grieving process that they go through when one of these relationship ends. If it's a consistent relationship, is being brought around the children, is being brought around the husband, is being involved in parts of the family. And if that's the case, then there would be a collective grief. It's a lot of speculation.
When I think about marginalized communities, so many like components that you think of like as cultural components of these communities were developed out of, resilience and out of necessity sometimes. And I think honestly, some of the qualities that, are most celebrated or people find most beautiful sometimes have been, created under that duress, under that stress. I think just, again, looking at that, exploring the beauties, the strengths, just someone from the outside of that community looking in, I just thought, that was a really interesting perspective. And I just thought that was a worthwhile thing to explore. Thank you, hosts, for your valuable contribution today. And thank you, Tribe, for joining us. We value you so much. We hope that you have found this conversation informative, enlightening, inspiring, encouraging, or all of the above. Hard and digital purchase options, as well as information about the chapters covered in our upcoming episodes, will be listed in the description box below. And if you're interested in joining the discussion, see the description box below for how you can join our Facebook group. We love to hear from you. And if you feel so inspired, subscribe, comment, and share. You, our community, are a large part of how we'll reach our mission for creating a more connected and compassionate society. Thank you all again, and join us next time. There's always room for you here. Journey well, y'all.